All right. Here we are. Let's get the cameras going. The Flights of Life podcast, episode 1. Mark. Here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are. This is episode 1 of the tentatively named Flights of Life podcast. So I wanted to start this podcast because I wanted to learn more about people. I wanted to learn about the different walks of life that they take, whether that be their careers, where they live, or just interesting stories that they have to tell in general, and sort of give people that platform to tell their story. So this is episode 1, ladies and gentlemen. Our first guest on the show, no other than Papa Schaake himself, Al Schaake.
The old man.
So we're sitting here, and this is a very shoestring setup. While I was setting this up, Pops over here was starting to have flashbacks on back when he worked in TV. So how long ago was that?
Well, it was a long time ago. I graduated from the University of Wyoming with a BS in Communications and Broadcasting in 1977. And between 1977 and 1980, I had thought my desire was to become a broadcasting professional. And so I started out after college going back to a little town we'd lived in the 60s called Goodland, Kansas. And that was not even 20 miles from the Colorado border in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It was 5,000 people in 1965 when we left there. It was 5,000 people when I was there in 1978, and it's less than 5,000 people now. It's not a place to grow.
That's interesting, though, how you had an itch to do the creative broadcasting TV stuff, because I think I inherited that a little bit, ended up in my genes.
Could be. I didn't have a clue, I can tell you that, of how things really worked.
I don't have a clue right now, so we have a ton in common.
But it was a little town. It's one of those little towns along the interstate that has a little sign and says, "Come see our largest spool of yarn in the world," or something, Yeah. But they had a AM radio station with 50,000 watts clear channel back from the 50s. They had an FM radio station. They had a TV station, and they had a cable head end, and cable was just coming in. So I did nothing but work. What reminded me of that when we came into your little studio here was the TV studio, because two days, twice in the evening, every evening, I did the news. I did the sports part of the news. If the weather guy didn't show up, I did the weather too. And so if it was a half-hour television cast, I did about 10 minutes of sports. And, it was fun, but it was old technology. I had dark black hair. You can't tell now. I had dark black hair, I had big, bushy black eyebrows, and we had not a green screen, but a blue screen behind us for the chroma key. And I used to wash out. My eyes used to wash out. They had a hard time keeping it balanced so that you could even see my eyes. But I was only making $600 a month. I was living in the basement of a small house. I didn't have a friend there. And after about 9 months of that, I'd had enough. So I went back home and ran a business for my dad for a year, trying to figure out what I was going to do, and applied for jobs in Denver in television. And I went to a second interview at the PBS station in Denver, where they were going to, I thought, say, "Congratulations, Al, you got a job." They said, "Sorry, Al, you don't have a job." So I was driving out Colfax Avenue, west towards where my parents lived, west of Denver, and I pulled into a Air Force recruiting station, a little sign that said Air Force recruiting. And that little impulse driving home that day, when I was so disappointed for having lost that job, that changed my life completely. I mean, the next, whatever it is, 50 years, 45 years, has been based on that, snap decision.
Was it a Air Force exclusive recruitment center, or
Yeah.
was it multiple branches? And did you have a choice, or did you have a preference at all, or did you just go in blind and kind of?
No, it wasn't blind because my dad had been in the Air Force.
Yeah.
But he was a ROTC guy, and the only reason he was a ROTC guy was that he didn't have enough money to go to college. So, in order to supplement his scholarship, he did ROTC, and that meant he was committed to like 4 years of a active duty service commitment to the government. He went down to Harlingen, Texas, and acted as a physical education instructor at a navigator training center for 2 years. So at least in the back of my mind, I was aware of that, and I thought because my dad did it that the Air Force was the way to go. But I never even thought of the others. And the place, as I recall, it was a strip mall. And so there was a little Air Force recruiter there, and it seems to me that might have been Marines right next to him, but I can't be sure. But it wasn't very exciting. It was just a little office on a strip mall.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Yeah. One thing I learned over my many years in the Air Force and then later as a contractor supporting the Air Force is that the services are different. The way they are organized, similar maybe, but the way they're organized, the way they're funded, the way they operate are different. So most of what will be telling you throughout this is focused on the way the Air Force does business.
What is the first year like in terms of adapting? It's a complete 180 from the life that you were living before.
Oh, completely. Yeah.
How was that first year?
Well, let me talk about officer training school a little first, because that was part of the first year.
Yeah, it's a commissioning process, right?
Yes, that's the third commissioning avenue. The first is the academies. And in my case, the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. ROTC or ROTC is the second. All schools have ROTC programs. Some of them are huge, like Texas A&M or Virginia Military, and then the third one, which gets bigger when there are buildups and shrink down to almost nothing when the military is drawing down, is the training centers, Officer Training School for the Air Force. They call it OCS, Officer Candidate School in the Army. So that's a 13-week course instead of 4 years. It's 13 weeks. And so I show up. I cut off a full beard a week before I go. I cut my hair back a little bit. This is the late 70s. Remember, everybody had those big
Oh, I've seen the pictures.
disco hairdos, right?
You look like me.
Well, I was pretty bad. And so a lot of the other guys that were going into the OTS were prior enlisted. So they had been, enlisted. And again, you got to understand, I went in as an officer. I outranked everybody in the enlisted corps when I started.
Well, commissioning is only for officers.
Correct. There are non-commissioned officers, but non-commissioned. They're not commissioned. So some of these guys that were enlisted, non-commissioned officers, got accepted to OTS to get their commissions and become officers. They had a bunch of them who knew all about the military, how to dress, their hair was right, all this stuff. I can remember I went in, it was almost like a Marine movie. I went in and got a haircut and they skinned me. And all these guys that had been in the Air Force as enlisted just got little trims because their hair was
High and tight, baby.
high and tight. That's what I was. But you know something? I was kind of made for it. I don't know quite how to use the right word, but I started out the first 13 weeks and I didn't have a clue. Not the first clue. Difference between an officer and enlisted. By the time I finished, I was a distinguished graduate.
Hey.
Top 10%, because I took to it. It just seemed natural to me, and leadership is kind of a funny word, but even within our little group, our little squad, flight, actually it was a flight, I ended up in a leadership position in the flight because I just naturally gravitated toward it, you know. So that's how you asked how it started. That's how it started. Now, that's completely different from getting your commission and becoming a butter bar and going to a unit, because you go from being a distinguished graduate OTS to absolutely as low as you can go as an officer, and you have to start from the bottom and work your way up. And that's for everybody. Now, the path for people out of the academies is clearer and easier. The path for people coming out of ROTC is more clear. It's much more difficult for people that came in like I did. And I can describe that for people that are interested a little bit later, but it's different on those three different levels.
Today in 2026, that third option isn't really applicable.
No, it's still applicable. And I think now that we're into Trump's second term and they're actually starting to build up a little bit,
Yeah.
they aren't drawing down anyway, that those will always be there. It's just that they different military specialties within the military, it's like it goes up and down. Just by virtue of the way it is, the government personnel people, manpower people, they do knee jerks. They cut a bunch of people out. They add a bunch of people as time goes on to make everything balance out over time. And so there are different points in time where that officer training school route will have a lot of people in it, and there'll be some periods of time where there aren't many at all. It all depends on the needs of the Air Force. And it would be the same for the Army, the Navy, or the Marine Corps, or the Space Force. But of course, I was in the Air Force. And so if they ever did anything to you that you didn't like, they can just wink and say, it's the needs of the Air Force, sorry.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do.
So you mentioned after you commissioned, you started out as a butter bar.
Yeah.
And what were some of the projects, jobs, or tasks that you did specifically? And could you explain it to me like I'm 5 years old?
Like I used to?
Yeah.
Let me explain first where I was. Okay, so I came out of officer training school and somehow I ended up with the new AWACS program, the E3A AWACS, which is a 707 airplane with a big radar dome on it. We called it a roto-hooter. And it was just building up. The first squadron was finished. They were starting on the second squadron. They only had half their airplanes. So I was a second lieutenant going into that environment. About half the people that came into there a lot of them not wanting to, were coming from ground-based air defense units. And the others were like brand new butter bars coming out of, not very many from the academy, but a couple from ROTC and mostly from OTS. And so I ended up in a flying squadron, the 964th AWACS. And just as soon as they got that squadron stood up, we started to deploy to Germany, to Saudi Arabia, to Iceland. So people were going out the door constantly. And what I did, which everybody has additional duties of one kind or another. I became the simulation officer for the squadron with a couple of my other buddies, and we started to create these simulation scenarios where we'd go in the simulator and pretend we were fighting a little war in the simulator.
And the AWACS is a radar plane.
Yes. It is a big, powerful 1 megawatt pulse Doppler radar airplane. So it was kind of cutting edge technology for its day. And now it's still a very good radar. It's just that it's like being out there on the battlefield shining a big flashlight saying, here I am, here I am, here I am. And the ability of the bad guys to track and launch long-range weapons against that now has made it much less effective compared to what it was when I was starting out. When I was starting out, my job was to talk to and control airplanes with nuclear air-to-air missiles called AIR-1A Genies against against Soviet bomber formations. That was back then when I started, that was our primary job.
What do you imagine the modern day equivalent of that would be if they don't use AWACS anymore?
Well, they don't. I mean, only half of them are still active, and they are not reliable. There are no spare parts for them. They break down all the time. So there's a big thing now, and you'll see it in the news, where the Congress and the Pentagon are arguing over whether or not to buy radar planes that are called wedge tails. They're on a 737 platform that we've sold to the Australians and a couple of other countries years ago that they want to bring back online to fill that gap.
Are those manned?
Yes, those are manned. They're smaller. It's more modern. It's a more modern radar, but there's been a big emphasis on not needing those airplanes anymore. That will put all those sensors on satellites, and will connect them with communications going from every platform we have up in the air, and we'll have this wonderful big cloud, and everybody will have all the information that's available in the cloud. The problem is it's not available yet. So we have this gap between the old E3 and the new E7 wedge tail. I mean, they haven't made 707s in years and years and years, and you just can't get parts for them. And you can't get parts for the old radar either. So they need to go to something new. I hope they go to the E7 as a gap filler until all those wonderful satellite-based constellations come online.
What was it like spending all that time on an AWACS?
You know, when you went to Nellis Air Force Base and you participated in a red flag, it was so much fun because you'd have, I don't know, 120 planes, and you're coordinating it all. You've got 4 radios and 3 networks that you're listening to at different levels, and you're managing what's going on out there. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is like in the early 80s when I went to Saudi Arabia. We were based in Riyadh at the time. And we'd go up and we'd fly these 14-hour sorties, and we'd be on station for 12 hours, and we'd do absolutely nothing, you know. And I used to make up songs and just anything because the boredom was mind-numbing. and I can remember
his career path, man.
Well, you know, that career path, I'll tell you about my career path, and it's gotten a lot better. But in that instance, Iran and Iraq were fighting each other. There was a war going on, and we were there at the request of the king of Saudi Arabia, and we were making sure that it didn't spill over into Saudi Arabia. But there were a couple of nights I remember where we went south just for something to do and flew a couple hundred miles south, and the air surveillance officer, the guy who was responsible for the radar, was coming unglued because he thought the radar was broke. But there wasn't. Within the entire surveillance volume, 400 miles, everywhere you could see, there was nothing flying, absolutely nothing. And so, yeah, that's the other end of the spectrum. From being in war, like Desert Storm, which I didn't actually participate in that. I was up in protecting NATO at the time. But or a big red flag or exercise, or an exercise up in Alaska or in the Philippines or something, a big exercise with a bunch of airplanes, which is very exciting. To just going somewhere and doing surveillance those are the two ends of the spectrum.
How often did you pick up an enemy plane?
Enemy. So we have, and still do, I have a very detailed identification matrix that goes everywhere from friendly at one end to hostile at the other, and assumed hostile or assumed friendly. I've been in environments where we've had assumed hostiles and hostiles in our system. I used to fly, so I flew in the AWACS plane from 1980 to about 1991, the middle of 1991, almost 12 years. We had a few missions where we'd go chase drug runners down in South America or in Central America. The rules of engagement were pretty restrictive. Not like today, where you blow up drug boats. Back then, the customs service or whoever was in charge of drug enforcement would put a transponder they'd have some dude come stick a transponder on the bad guy plane, and we'd track it with the transponder. And then after it landed, drug enforcement would go in and arrest the guys. We had no way of attacking drug runners in their boats or in their airplanes. They'd fly around in these, Bonanza twin-engine airplanes all the time. And we knew they were there, and we knew they were bad guys, but all we could do was track them. So I did several missions to South America and Central America where we did that kind of thing when I was flying in AWACS planes.
What was your job specifically on the AWACS?
Okay, let me explain real quick.
Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah, not hardly anybody understands how this works, and it's different for the different services. But the career field I was in was called Air Battle Manager. And we had, at the time I was flying, 2 basic functions on that AWACS plane. One was called Weapons Director or Weapons Controller, and our job was to look on the screen, track the bad guys, and talk to the friendly aircraft on the radio and give them point outs and directions on how to go intercept and take care of the bad guys. The other job I did when I was in NATO for 6 years was air surveillance officer, surveillance controller in NATO terms. And they're the ones that control the sensors on the airplane. So they're both officers, but they have different jobs. And that's the job I did in NATO. It was fun, controlling the radar.
One is more for communication with other planes, while the other is for maintaining the equipment on the plane.
Correct. And the main equipment that we had was the radar. We had radar that could track airplanes. We had radar that could track boats, how they interleaved with each other and all that kind of stuff. Now, since then, they've added passive detection equipment. So there's a third function where they're just listening for the emissions of the bad guys and trying to figure out who they are. So those are the 3 basic functions on the airplane: controlling airplanes, controlling the radar and the identification functions, and controlling the passive sensors.
And the passive sensors, how does that differ from radar?
With the radar, you send out a pulse of energy, and it reflects off an airplane and comes back to you. And if it's a Doppler radar, it listens for the change in frequency, so you can tell whether it's moving away from you or toward you. Blah blah blah. A passive sensor just sits and listens, so it's listening for their radars. It's just listening for their radars. So, and the E7 that we would be going to, if we go to it, would have good. All 3 of those functions are well represented on that new airplane.
When we were living in Iceland and you had your name on the hangar.
Yeah, that was a nice time.
What point were you at in your career?
Lieutenant Colonel.
You were already a lieutenant colonel in Iceland?
Yeah. Squadron commander. So first 2 years, second lieutenant, second 2 years, first lieutenant. Then I went about 7 years as a captain. And got promoted to major. And then there was another 3 or 4 years from major to lieutenant colonel. We were actually in Belgium at Supreme Headquarters Allied Command Europe when I got promoted to lieutenant colonel. And it was out of there that I was picked up to become the commander of the Iceland Air Defense System. In the Air Force, there are just a whole bunch of enlisted and officer, we call them Air Force specialty codes. So depending on which road you go down, you'll be exposed to and you'll gain a great deal of expertise very specifically down that road, that stovepipe. I personally think that's one of the biggest weaknesses that we have in the Air Force is that we're so stovepipe, because the money comes into a stovepipe and is used for a specific purpose in the stovepipe, and it makes it difficult to coordinate across the stovepipes because the money comes in to do those specific things. Intelligence, a bunch of different levels of logistics and maintenance are all areas that are completely separate from operations where I did most of my career. And my operations were just command and control, AWACS, and then the ground-based radar systems, and then working mostly on command and control type things as a contractor later. Whereas you got guys that spend their whole careers in fighters, fighter bombers, tankers, airlifters, surveillance planes. Each one of those is a whole world unto itself. So it would be difficult to say, if you go into the military, this is what it's going to be like. If you go into one of these different gazillion things in the military, it's going to be different.
How much control do you have over the type of path that you're going to take? Like say that you want to be a fighter pilot.
Everybody wants to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah, I know that one's competitive. But if you had a specific type of plane you wanted to fly, for instance, how much control would you have over your path to get there?
I would have none. If you go to the Air Force Academy and graduate with an engineering degree and do everything you need to do to go to pilot training, then you could come out of pilot training and get a 5th generation single seat fighter. That's what everybody wants to do. But not very many people actually get to do that. I think the answer to your question is hardly anybody that joins the military ends up doing what they thought when going in that they really wanted to do. They might be perfectly satisfied with what they ended up doing, but not everybody can be a 5th gen fighter pilot. And so, you end up being, if you come out of the academy, you can't get a fighter, you get a tanker, you get a airlifter, you get a bomber. If you become a navigator, not so good. You become an air battle manager, not so good. And then you're into the support career fields, which is even less good if you desire to become the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. If you're happy with serving your country, making a contribution, topping out at 05, which is Lieutenant Colonel, or 06, which is Colonel, there are an awful lot of people that have had very successful careers getting to that level. But very few people get, just by virtue of the numbers, get to the highest ranks.
The way I've always understood it is that there are points throughout your career where you can express a preference for the type of work that you want to do.
Yes, the answer is yes. We call them AFSCs, Air Force Specialty Codes. For the enlisted, it's easier to move from one discipline to another. It's a lot harder for an officer. So if you're enlisted, and you have been a infantryman, and you're not so hot about being an infantryman after 6 years, you can study, you can take a test, and you can move over to become maybe a military policeman or something. Well, it's a lot harder for an officer because you're kind of wedded into that stovepipe, that career field that you started with. So if you do it early. You do it when you're a captain because you have to have time to build up expertise within that career field to be competitive, to become a commander. And if you want to make the higher ranks, you have to be a commander at some level.
For you, that stovepipe was air defense.
Yeah, air battle manager. I was so lucky in so many ways. In a lot of ways, I did everything. I ended up becoming a colonel in 06. And when you look at the path I took, it's just really a miracle that I was able to get promoted from lieutenant colonel to colonel. But I had been a commander as a major of a small detachment, and I was a commander of a squadron. They both of those command tours went well. My units did well. And I actually didn't have a recommendation that was high enough to get me promoted when I left Iceland. When I was a lieutenant colonel and I left that commander slot, I was in what they called the primary zone for promotion at that time, and I was certain that I wasn't going to make it. But the 3-star general at the 8th Air Force looked at my promotion recommendation and decided it wasn't high enough. I have no idea why he did that. I think it's divine intervention in some way. But he called back to the colonel that wrote my promotion recommendation and asked him to reconsider it. And so they raised it. And I got promoted based on that. So that's what happened to me.
That does sound a little bit like divine intervention, yeah.
You know, Jason, while I'm thinking about it, I probably ought to mention security clearances. Because not for everybody, and not necessarily for the infantrymen in the Army or the riflemen in the Marine Corps, but for people that have the more technical types of career fields in the military, the security clearance becomes a big deal as you move through your career. In my career, I had secret clearance for the first, 6 or 8 years, and then after that, I got a top secret clearance. Had a top secret clearance through my career, and then and that's important depending on what kind of job you're doing. There are actually clearances that are above top secret that are for compartmentalized types of information that I also had over periods of time. But you get access to specific types of information for the specific job you're doing, and then you're read out of it and you completely forget everything you knew. But as you become more senior and you end up in staff type positions, you have to have access to classified information to do your job. In my case, operational planning. Then when I became a contractor, I got hired because I had that security clearance, right? You have a background investigation, and that background investigation that says you're good and you're valid for a certain number of years. And then they do another background investigation. What's happened over the years is that because it's so hard to do all these background investigations, they just, as long as there isn't any reason to expect there's a problem with you, they'll just continue your clearance, your background investigation indefinitely. And that's what they did with me maybe 10, 12, 15 years ago. I can't remember exactly. Okay, so you retire from your military position. You look to get a job as a civilian, or you look to get a job as a contractor. Most of those, I would say, require a security clearance, a valid background investigation, and a security clearance. In my case, the jobs I did the last 15 years when I was a contractor required a current top secret, and then all the experience that goes with it. So the point then is that that security clearance is something that you want to make sure you're able to retain and make current, so that when you move from a military job to a civilian or contractor job, that it's in place and make it a lot easier moving forward.
Are you allowed to disclose?
Oh yeah. There are a lot of different levels of classified material, from restricted to confidential to secret to top secret. But if you're doing any kind of significant job at all, you've got either a secret or a top secret clearance. Everybody in the intelligence career fields have a top secret. Most of the people in the logistics career fields are only secret. They have no need for a top secret classification. And that just gives you access to the information. You still have to have a need to know. So you get a job and you're working, and there's this information out there that's classified at a certain level. If you have a need to know that classification and you have the appropriate clearance, then you'll be able to access it. And then when you retire, you sign a piece of paper that says basically you forgot everything you knew. Because even when you're retired, you can't disclose any of that classified information.
It's like an NDA, but...
It's essentially like that, yeah. It's an NDA when you retire. So I don't remember a thing.
There you go. What was your security clearance as a contractor?
Top secret. With some special access type programs on top of that. the plans that I worked on were top secret. And as networks and ways to communicate things become compromised over time, you know, back when we thought that everything that was secret was sacrosanct and nobody could listen to our secret communications, now we're not so sure. So in order to make sure that your information's safe, you just move the classification up to top secret, and now it's on a completely different set of systems and encryption capabilities that keep it much safer. It's a hell of a lot harder to get to, you know, but it's safer. So I worked in that world the last 5 or 6 years I was a contractor. I have an interesting story. I don't know if it's...
I'll go for it.
I went to NATO in 1985, and I became a surveillance controller and air surveillance officer on the AWACS planes. And a few of us that came over from the U.S. had top secret clearances. So they worked the NATO clearances, a whole parallel set of NATO clearances, and they gave me a cosmic top secret NATO clearance. Cosmic, I don't know what it means, but it's a parallel clearance in the NATO world to top secret in the U.S. world.
It just sounds intense.
Cosmic is pretty cool, yeah. So I'm sitting in my office one day. It's like a couple of years before I left, and a person came over and said, "Can you come across the street? We have something we'd like you to look at." And apparently this chunk of cosmic top secret material came into the wing headquarters building, and absolutely nobody over there had a clearance that allowed them to look at it. So they said, "We understand you have a cosmic top secret clearance. Would you mind looking at it for us?" So I went down into the basement and I looked at it, and it had to do with nuclear stuff. I'll just leave it at that. It had to do with nuclear. That's about all I looked at. It had to do with nuclear stuff. I closed it up and I said, "That went to the wrong place. It has nothing to do with us." And they sent it back to the originator. But that was the only time I'd ever did anything with cosmic top secret material the whole time I was in NATO. And I was directly associated with NATO for 8 years.
How much trouble do you get in something like that?
If you willingly provide...
Not even provide, but just if you stumble across something like that.
I'd report it.
If you looked at it before you reported it, that'd probably be just as bad.
If I looked at it and I recognized what it was and I reported it, I'd be fine. We have all these things that have gone on in recent times where people have disclosed classified information to news outlets and stuff like that, and then got a slap on the hand. You know, I would expect if I did it, that I'd go to jail for a very long time. In my mind, it's treason, and I don't think there should be any slapping of the hands when it comes to that kind of thing. If you're negligent, that's one thing. If you're negligent, you didn't mean to do it, and you can prove that you didn't mean to do it, you still go to jail, but you don't go to jail as long as if you intended to do it. If you intended to do it, they should throw away the key.
At that point, it's a compromise to public safety if it's nuclear information.
If it has anything to do with operations or capabilities, right? If it has anything to do with what a weapon system can actually do, that's bad. If it has something to do with the intelligence sources that bring information into our information loop, you know, that's really bad. It's also really bad if it has anything to do with the programmatics and how much it costs to create a capability. So when you're working on a process or a document that's highly classified, you have to look at every paragraph, you look at everything that's said, so that you can ensure that you understand where the information came from that went in the document, you know, and that it's good to go.
For the young man or woman out there that's considering making this their career, what do they have to do to reach the colonel rank?
It depends on which stovepipe he's in. It depends on which career field he's in. I think it's true in almost anything you do, really. That what you have to do is whatever career field you get started in, you work hard in it and you stick with it, and then you do the best you can to support what the senior officers above you are trying to achieve. And if you do that, they'll take care of you to a certain level. I never thought of it. I never thought I'd ever make colonel, and I didn't worry about it. Maybe that was the secret. I had so many friends that were worried about it when they were second lieutenants, trying to get this job and that and do this job and that and get an endorsement from this person and that. And that was just, oh man, just do your job. Do your job and do it well. And then you'll because people fall out. A certain percentage of people fall out as you go up. They just don't want to stay in the service anymore, or they get passed over for promotion. And once you get up to the point where you're promoting for lieutenant colonel and colonel, the numbers are much smaller. Everybody's pretty good. So then it's just a matter of ensuring that, you're just doing the best job you can and hope for the best. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. 100%. Like any career in life, your character in wanting to do the best job that you can for the sake of getting the job done at its best, rather than the incentive of promotion, is what separates you.
You're right. There are two ways. One group of people tries too hard, and the other people shy away and just try to get ahead by not upsetting anybody. I had several points in my career where I came within an inch of losing it all just because I was stubborn, I guess. But in each case where I won't call it getting into trouble, but I got into sticky situations, it was because I was trying to do my job and I was trying to meet what I knew my boss wanted to achieve. And so in each case, my boss took care of me, covered for me. I had one time where I was at SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, and I was working on something called the by Major NATO Command C2 directive, and it was a new document because NATO was reorganizing and it was expanding. And to put it long story short, a bunch of the countries wanted their own CAOCs, their own command and control centers for air defense. And we were trying to knock it down to start off with a minimum of 10. Now they have 2 after all these years, but Norway and Turkey in particular wanted to have more than one. And so I was trying to write this thing for this British Commodore that said, you can have 2, but you can't have 2 CAOCs. I couldn't write both those things. And I ended up writing an email to an American guy at Ramstein Air Force Base at United States Air Forces Europe. He printed out the email, which basically said, we can't do this, what the hell? And a British flight lieutenant or somebody came by and picked it up off his desk, took it to the general who was commanded that unit. And it ended up with the chief of staff at SHAPE, which was a German 4-star. And I ended up sitting at attention in his office just getting chewed out by this German army officer. So right before I went in to get chewed out, and I got a call from the commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe. And he said, "Are you in trouble, Major Schaake, or Lieutenant Colonel Schaake?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but I think I may be." And he said, "Well, when you get sure, call me, because we'll have you reassigned down here in the 5 minutes after that." So they basically told me that they understood what was going on, and they would not, allow these guys to ruin my career. So that was one instance that most people don't have the joy of experiencing. But that was kind of my way. I don't know what it is about me, but I didn't care about the medals, and I didn't much care about the promotions. I always just felt like if I stayed in the present and tried to do the best I could. And so when you're talking to somebody like me, to go back to the question you asked like 20 minutes ago, it's that you just do the best you can within your career field, stick with it, and try to ensure that you're meeting the needs of your boss, who's also trying to meet the needs of his boss. And if you're doing that, then you're supporting the process the way it's supposed to work.
I love it. Authenticity. Yeah, the mic's going to pick that ice up, by the way. I'm going to re-say what I said.
Say it. Go ahead. Start over. I'm sorry. I'm an icer. Let me just finish this. Okay, get her. Ask again.
What are the selling points that they use in recruitment offices when they're bringing in new recruits? I've been told there's a big emphasis on getting to travel the world. You've worked a lot of TDY, so would you say that's a big positive?
To me, I wanted to have a job. And so this idea of having a steady paycheck as an officer, you're not going to get rich as a lieutenant, but it's a steady paycheck. And then the other part of it was, in 20 years you can retire with a pension for the rest of your life. And then the idea of, I really liked the idea of doing something positive for my country. I was kind of patriotic in that way. I thought, even if I do it for 4 years, I'll have done something in the military to support my country, to do that. And then to see the world, not so much, but as the guy was talking, that really grew on me. So when I was in training, I went to Japan in training because they didn't have enough trainers yet at the base I was at in Oklahoma. So I ended up going to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Japan for a month, and a week of that was in the Philippines. Man, that was so cool. And then I come back and boom, I'm just off to Saudi Arabia. And back then they didn't do the 6-month rotations and 3-month rotations. We go for 3.5 weeks and then we come back. So I got to go in the first couple of years to Saudi Arabia, Germany, Iceland, Japan. And then over time, especially as a contractor, I have been all over the place. And that's, I would say that if you like adventure and you like to see different places, that's probably the biggest draw when you're young, is to say, I'm going to get to go all over the world.
What was your favorite spot to TDY?
I can put it in a group. Between 1985 and 1991, I was assigned to the NATO AWACS in Geilenkirchen, Germany. And this was right on the border. Your mother...
That's where you met my mom.
Your mother was the secretary to the chief of plans and programs in the NATO E3A component. That's where I met her. We had 5 forward operating bases: Turkey, Greece, Italy, Norway, England. So I'm just going to group all of them together. Those were the best TDYs. And we would only go for a week at a time. And we'd only fly like twice. And so you'd get to see. One time I took a train from Orland, Norway to Sweden. All the places to go in southern Germany. The places in Italy was on Sicily, on the southern coast of Sicily. The place in Greece was in Lefkada, which is an island just off the west part of the main land of Greece. Turkey was at Konya, just south of Ankara, in the area where the whirling dervishes come from, and all the catacombs and all that. I mean, these were just wonderful places to go visit.
How do you like Thailand?
Thailand was nice. we helped build a courtyard around the school, to help out the local
Oh, interesting.
Thai people, which was really cool. A lot of times when they do these big exercises, bilateral, trilateral, multilateral exercises, they'll have some sort of humanitarian thing associated to it, where they'll take in engineers and build something or repair something, and that always makes us look good in the eyes of the locals when we're able to do something like that.
It is good. You support your country and other countries as well.
Yeah.
What was the hardest point in your military career?
I had a couple of low points that were very difficult.
I remember you telling me the story more than once of the time that you were shipped off to Saudi Arabia right after I was born. I remember you telling me that was one of the hardest parts.
Yeah, that was the hardest. It wasn't 6 months, it was 2 months. And that was a big turning point from a career perspective in my career progression. I went from nowhere to having a career progression because I agreed on very short notice to take the job of a detachment commander in Saudi Arabia. And it was an accompanied job back then, which means you take your family with you. It's 2 years with your family as opposed to 1 year without your family. I agreed to do that before you were born, and I was out the door a month after you were born. And that was really hard. That was just really, your grandma and your grandpa on my side helped out a lot to get your mom moved. And then your mom picked you up as an infant and went to Europe for a little while and then ended up in Saudi Arabia after about 3 months. The hardest part for me was showing up in Saudi Arabia and you guys weren't there. That was absolutely the hardest. What the hell have I done kind of thing. Once you finally showed up in Saudi Arabia and we started to live as a family again, I relaxed a little bit. But there was a time there where I was very unhappy, a very short time.
That was the first time in your life you were put in a position like that.
Yeah, I had no control.
It seems like you chose the better of the two options, though. Like 2 years fully detached would have been so much worse.
Yeah, it would have been. And your mom was wonderful. I mean, we hadn't been married that long. We'd spent almost 3 years in Virginia, but I was going to sign the papers. And I at one point I told her, I said, I don't think I can do this. And she put her hand on my hand and helped me sign it. And that was great. That let me know that she was all in.
And that's what it takes, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
For military families.
Yeah, and most of them do it. I've got so many friends that have weathered the storm and stayed married through the whole thing. I've got an awful lot of friends that the successful marriage was the second marriage because they didn't understand that they'd had to have that buy-in for the first one. One of the things that's really nice about the military is that for the most part they take care of their families really well. We still buy our groceries and stuff. I'm fully retired, but we go over to the Army base nearby and we buy our groceries and stuff there. The family support is just fine. You just have to have the mindset that you're happy to use it, And maybe one of the coolest times we had, kind of to describe that, was we were in Iceland for 2 years, and you were a little boy. Your little brother was just toddler.
Such great memories of Iceland.
And that was a completely isolated. It was on a Navy base, but you couldn't really do much on the economy. You couldn't take 2 6-packs of beer out through the base, through the gate, because they didn't want you damaging their economy. So we had a 9-family building, 3 stories, 3 apartments per story. Of those 9 families, 8 of them just did everything together. We had a potluck every Friday on the second floor. All the kids did stuff together. All the families did stuff. That might have been one of the closest, happiest environments I've ever been in. So anyway, it's tough. It's tough. But for me, I did 2 accompanied remote tours, 2 2-year tours with my family. And for me, that was so much better than what other people opted to do. Just go off for a year on your own and then come back. And that would have killed me.
So what's the difference between an accompanied tour versus your assignment in Hawaii?
That's a good question. And for people wanting to join the military, it's important to understand. Back when I joined the military, this idea of long-term, expanded, small conflicts all over the world, we didn't do any of that, right? So we started doing 3.5 weeks, a month and a half, 3 months, kind of ad hoc. And the Air Force finally had to decide we've got to settle on 6-month rotations to the desert, to Iraq, to Afghanistan. We have permanent bases and troops in Germany and South Korea, but that was kind of new. That all came after the 2 accompanied remote tours that I did with my family. I would not have been able to do that anymore. I would have had to pick up later in my career. I never did it. I never had to. But I would have had to pick up and go somewhere for 6 months by myself and come back. So that's the way it is now. That's the reality. We're not really spread out in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria like we were before, but we still have troops there, and we still have an air operations center in Qatar, for instance, that needs to be manned with people that are in my career field. So when people coming into the service now need to understand that those 6-month rotations are going to be a part of their life, and they need to be prepared for their families to be well cared for while they're gone and until they get back.
They don't do the accompanied tours at all anymore.
No, they still do those, but it's not like it was.
It's more rare.
Yeah, and it's becoming less. I mean, Osan Air Base, the bases in South Korea, yes. The Ramstein in Germany, yes. But they're becoming less and less as time goes on. The accompanied tours. As for Hawaii, actually, a guy had to hurt his back really bad. I was coming out of that command, and they were reorganizing the way that the assignments were handed out for my career field in the Air Force, and they hadn't gotten it fixed yet. So there were a whole bunch of people that hadn't gotten assignments in their normal assignment windows. And so this guy hurt his back. A guy I knew in the unit here called me. He said, this guy hurt his back. And so I said, I contacted the people who do the assignments and said, I'd be happy to go there. That's about the only time I ever even got involved in my own assignments. And so they gave me the assignment. Got promoted shortly after I got here. Was the deputy commander of a group for a couple of years, and then was a division chief on the Pacific Air Force's major command staff for 2 years before I retired. Which leads me to another point. And this is something I think is important for people to understand, is that I did 26 years in the Air Force as an officer. I did 20 years as a contractor after that, supporting the Air Force. So a lot of people, I don't know if most, but a lot of people have a military-related career after they actually retire from the military, either as a government civilian or a contractor. In my case, I was a contractor. A lot of them go off and do civilian stuff. They become managers in towns and lawyers and cops and all sorts of different stuff. But a lot of them do what I did.
What percentage of people do you think find jobs that continue to support the Air Force?
The people that I'm aware of in my bubble, maybe half,
Yeah.
about half. And of those, half of them are contractors and half of them are government. If you become a government employee, like you're an Air Force civilian employee, there's a lot of stability in that. If you become a contractor for a company that has contracts supporting the Air Force, that's a real crapshoot. And I ended up with essentially 4 5-year runs in different capacities as a contractor.
We thought you never were going to retire.
Yeah, it was a big joke, wasn't
For
it?
the last 10 years of your career.
I turned 70. That was a biggie. I could get my full Social Security and all that was kind of in the back of my head. But the main thing was I just got tired of the constant low-level conflict
Yeah.
between the services, in particular between the Air Force and the Navy in this theater out here. And we could do another hour and a half on that. But also within the Air Force between the people in the different stovepipes. Yeah, I don't miss that part of it at all. When people come into the Air Force and they're working at unit level jobs, they don't see any of it. They don't feel any of it. It's only later when you get into higher level positions, like as a colonel maybe, lieutenant colonel, and then when you retire and you're trying to support these colonels, that you get to see how hard it is to get anywhere. So I don't miss that.
There's a big advantage to it, though. You get a paycheck on top of your retirement benefits, basically like 2 paychecks.
Yeah, I can't complain. It doesn't exist the way it did when I came into the service anymore. It's not quite as good as it used to be.
That was going to be my next question.
It's more like a 401k now.
Yeah.
But after World War II and up through, I don't know, the middle of my career, this full pension thing was in effect, and I'm still living under it. And then when I pay $600 a month into a survivor benefit plan so that when I die, my wife gets 50% of my pension for the rest of her life. So all that is a good deal. And I recognized that when I walked into that recruiter's office in 1980. In order to earn a full retirement, you have to be in the service for 20 years. So when I came in, that meant that you had to make major. The high year of tenure for a major when I came in other words, the amount of time they would allow you to stay in if you made major was 20 years. You make major, you get to 20 years, you got your retirement. 50% of your base pay for 20 years. Now, your base pay is only half of what you made, right? It's really good, but it's not.
It's a good supplement for your next job.
Right. So your base pay is half. The other half is your housing allowance and all that. So when you retire, you don't get 50% of all of that. You only get 50% of the base pay. So if you stay in for 26 years, you get the amount you retired at and not 50%. It's 50% plus 2.5% per year. So the more you're able to stay in by making rank, the larger your pension becomes down the road.
That's the way it worked for you, but that's not how it's set up anymore.
No, and I can't tell you exactly how it works now. I have a military pension and I have Social Security. And between the two of those, I don't have to worry about going hungry. So you're gonna have a nice nest egg if you come in as an enlisted person or you come in as an officer and you stay for 20 years. You're gonna have a nice nest egg moving forward to whatever you do after that. It's a good deal.
Too.
What's that?
The educational benefits.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I just thought of that too. Most of the enlisted people that stay in past their first couple of hitches, because enlisted people have a hitch of, I don't know, 3-4 years, and then they have to re-enlist and then re-enlist. Officers don't do that, but enlisted do. As they're going through this process, most of them that stay with it get an associate's degree, and almost everybody that was in the headquarters with me has a bachelor's degree. So all these enlisted people have at least an associate's, and most of them have a bachelor's degree to move forward, right? Officers have to have a bachelor's degree to get in the service as an officer. Almost everybody that makes rank gets a master's degree. That's just one of those things you got to do. So that's what I did. And so I did that for going to school at night for 2 years while we were in Germany, because you just have to do it. So the military really promotes improving your civilian education, but it's really kind of mandatory. Then the other part of it is they have all these professional schools as you progress that you have to do. In the Air Force, for what I did, Squadron Officer School, Air Force Command and Staff College, and then Air War College, which is what you got to have if you ever hope to make colonel. So you do those professional ones, you get your master's degree, and you got a shot. If you don't do that, you don't have a shot.
I'm wondering about the difficulty in becoming an officer through the enlisted route versus the direct route.
A lot of people do that. You got to you got to do that in the first few years. And in the first few years, staff sergeant, bachelor's degree, then you apply to officer training school.
There is a route for everybody, though.
Oh yeah. When I got to Tinker Air Force Base with the new AWACS in 1980, half of those guys were prior enlisted that went to officer training school, and it didn't work out the way a lot of those guys wanted.
Why is that?
Well, you know how I told you the personnel manpower people do these knee-jerk reactions to manage the force? All these people came in, they gave them all commissions as second lieutenants like in 1980. By 1991, they were all competitive to become majors, but they would have had too many majors. So they sent them letters, and they said, according to your past and your career path, if you meet the major in the primary zone, you have a 15% chance of being promoted. However, we will be more than happy to buy you out with either cash or an early retirement. So most of them took the cash or the early retirement. There were a couple that I knew, one in particular, a friend of mine. He was really pissed off about it. He wanted to be able to compete for major. He wanted to go on with his career. And of course, he met the board and he got passed over. And he didn't get his retirement. So, that's the kind of thing that can happen. Some of those guys, because they did such a knee-jerk reaction and brought the number of majors down, they had a shortage a little bit later, and they brought some of them back on contract as majors for like 3 or 4 years. But they couldn't compete. They couldn't compete to get promoted anymore. Or they brought them back as captains. So those, if you come, I guess the way I look at it, if you become an officer, get commissioned after several years as enlisted, your chance of making high rank as an officer are low. But you can have a very good career up through about major or lieutenant colonel if you want to. But you shouldn't get your hopes up to get much higher than that because you started behind the 8 ball a little bit.
So there's a understood timeline of where you're supposed to be in the ranks by a certain age.
You have no control over that, and it's locked in. So there's, for every officer in the Air Force, there are certain points in time where you hit the primary zone for promotion. If you don't get promoted, you're out. If you do get promoted, you move to the next rank, right? And then associated with making that rank, there is a service commitment it means you have to, if you accept the rank, you have to stay in a little longer. And then there's a high year of tenure that says if you don't get promoted anymore, this is the longest you can stay in. That's how it works. So a major was 20, high year of tenure. So if you make major at like the 11-year point, you can stay in, 12, 13-year point, you can stay in till 20. I think Lieutenant Colonel was 24. Colonel was 30. So I got out 4 years before I had to. There was no way on God's green earth I was ever going to be competitive to be a brigadier general. I was lucky enough to make full colonel. But I could have stayed in 4 more years. The problem I had with that was I wasn't competitive to be a group commander, a full group commander. I was a deputy commander. If I wasn't competitive to be a full group commander, then I would be taking what I called any colonel jobs. You know, they need a colonel. They don't care what service he's from. They don't care what he does. We just need a colonel. So I would have had to move 3 times in 4 years with little kids and a wife in school. So I opted. It was a no-brainer for me. I would have liked to stay and be a colonel. Being a colonel's cool. I would have liked to do that for another 4 years, but not with 3 moves. The last one being wherever I would decide I wanted to live after I was finished.
I remember you explaining this to me when I was 12.
Yeah. Did it make sense then?
It makes more sense now.
You want to go live in a suburb of Washington and watch me go to the Pentagon every morning?
You said we were going to have to move again. I didn't know we were going to have to move 3 more times in 4 years.
Yeah, those are typically 2-year tours. And I was at the 26-year point, so we'd have a 2-year. We'd move 2-year tour, move 2-year tour, then move to retire. That was 3 moves, 4 years. Yeah, yeah. And it's been funny because I've been working as a contractor for 20 years. And I've been all these various offices doing various things, watching these younger Air Force people, sitting there like a fly on the wall, listening to them talk about their issues that are along those lines. What's the next job? When do I retire? And so many of them come up and say, can you give me an advice about what I can do after I retire? And I tell them there are 2 choices. You can do what you want to do, or you can be where you want to be. Nirvana is to be where you want to be and do what you want to do, but I said I haven't known many people that have been able to pull that off. Normally it's one or the other.
I've heard of the triangle before. I think it's where you want to be, what you want to do, how much you want to get paid. Pick 2.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true.
Over the course of, let's say, a 4 or 8-year career as an officer, how many tours could you expect to do throughout your career?
You know what a WAG is? WAG, wild ass guess.
Well, there you go.
Let me say first of all that I think it completely depends on what's going on in the world. In my career field, there are a couple of remotes where you can go accompanied. The Air Operations Center in Germany, Ramstein Air Force Base, the Air Operations Center, or just the big base at Osan in South Korea. There are other places. But in my career field, there's one 6-month rotation that is at Qatar. It's the U.S. Central Command Air Operations Center in Qatar. And in my career field, I think you could probably count on going there once every 3 years for 6 months. That would probably be about right. Once every 3 years, maybe even a little bit longer, because they rainbow the people out of all the air operations centers in the Air Force out there. So it should work that they would take the person that hasn't been there before, hasn't been there for the longest time for that specialty and put them in there. I don't think it always works that way. I think some people tend to get kind of screwed. There are other people that like that kind of thing. Yeah, I'll go. Send me. I'm single. I don't care.
Just seems like with my military buddies, they got shipped around a lot.
Yeah, but that was we had significant forces in Iraq and Afghanistan for a long time. We had some in Syria, ground forces. We don't have those anymore. So the people that rotate in and out of there more often than not now are specialists, like special forces. So the amount that the run-of-the-mill G.I. Joe has to go overseas on these rotations is less. So it's a little bit different now than it was a few years ago when your friends were in the Army. We had forces in Afghanistan and Iraq, Syria some. Those were rotational forces, and they're largely not there anymore. In the Air Force, in my career field, we still have South Korea and Germany for family accompanied tours. The main one in our career field that's unaccompanied now is in Qatar, the operations center there. And we rainbow people from all the air operations centers. There are 5 big Falcon or AOCs and a bunch of smaller specialty U.S. Air operations centers. And so you take people from all of those and you rainbow them in for 6 months at a time into Qatar. So I would say that probably in a 3-year period, you'd probably go once for 6 months, or maybe a little bit longer than that. And there's something new now. It's a show of force type of thing. There are acronyms for the different types of deployments. I won't try to get into those, but where we'll take a carrier, a couple of carrier battle groups, and a whole bunch of Air Force things, and we'll send them out all over the West Pacific, and we'll do a big exercise for over 3 months. Maybe we'll come back to Alaska or off the coast of California and do a big exercise there. For all the people participating in that, it's like a deployment. I mean, they're gone for months, and then they come back. So those kinds of things are becoming more and more prevalent. Instead of going for 6 months and squatting in Afghanistan, you're going out for this named operation for 3 months in the Westpac, and then you're coming back. I don't think and then there are some specialty organizations like the AWACS that just got bombed with temporary duty deployments over the many years. If you have a few airplanes and a special job and you're needed everywhere, you're going to deploy more than a specialty that has a bunch of airplanes that don't need to go as much. So it depends. It depends on what type of weapon system you're in and where you're needed. But in general, to answer your question, I would say that nowadays, most people will go on 1 6-month deployment every 4 years or so, probably.
And you just gotta find a way to coordinate with your family.
Yep.
All right, so I want to take just a little bit of time and talk about the reserve options. What would you say are the positives and negatives of doing that?
The main negative is it takes you forever to build up a reasonable retirement compared to active duty. What traditional reservists do, the ones who come in 2 days a month and 2 weeks in the summer, is that with that very limited amount of time, the time they build up towards what would be an active duty retirement is very slow. Now, a lot of times what they'll do, for 6 months here and there, or 1 or 2 years, they'll come on active duty orders, and it'll build up much quicker. And there are some traditional reservists who run the units and are on essentially active duty timing. But I don't think that's not the reason people join the reserves. I think there are a couple. One is that they're patriots, and they want to be involved. Actually, three things. The second is that there's something they like. Maybe they're a reserve pilot who flies for the airlines but gets to go play in an F-22, a couple times a year. And then the third thing would be that it is a steady source of income to supplement what you're doing. But I had the last 6 or 7 years I was supporting the Pacific Air Forces in the 613th Air Operations Center. I actually found a place to sit among a guard unit and an intel unit. And there was hardly ever anybody there. But when they were there, that's all they were doing was talking about how to work the short-term assignments in the AOC so they could work for 6 months straight. And in order to make rank as an officer in the Guard, it's not just making rank, it's that you have to have a job. There has to be an opening for you to go into. Guardsmen tend to get really skilled in a narrow area over a long period of time, but that doesn't necessarily make them very suitable.
I'm going to cut you off real quick.
Uh-huh.
What's the difference between a reservist and a guardsman? Are they just synonymous?
There are two things in the reserves. One is the reserves and the other is the National Guard. So they're similar, but the National Guard belongs to the state governors, and they're there to be activated in times of war or emergency within the state. So there's Hawaii National Guard, there's Hawaii Air National Guard, and the air portion. The reserves are federal, right? So reservists are in units, but they work directly for the federal government, not the state. That's the difference. So the people I was sitting with were from the Hawaii National Guard and worried about all the Guard things. And I used to just talk to them. I said, you guys have the craziest system, For me on active duty, the things that are very straightforward for them are very convoluted, difficult. So they'll start where an active duty guy would start right after he gets out of officer training school or ROTC or whatever. He'll start
In 01?
In 01, a second lieutenant. In 01, yes. So an active duty guy will get out of ROTC or OTS. He'll go to a tech school, If he's a pilot, he goes to pilot training. And then after that, he goes to an RTU unit where he gets specialized in a certain type of aircraft. In my case, AWACS, we'd go to a technical school in Florida, and then we'd go to Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and we get our specialized training in the AWACS plane, right? If you're a guardsman, it might, in what takes you 3 or 4 months to do at active duty to get up to speed, it might take them 3 or 4 years because they do it a little at a time. And so the whole thing is just expanded out. To stand up a unit in the active duty might take 2 years. To get a Guard or reserve unit up to speed might take 6 or 8. Once they're up to speed, they're great, right? And then in order for the federal government to use them, they have to be federalized. So they're Title 32, I think, as guardsmen. They get activated under Title 10, and then just like active duty until such time as they're not needed anymore, and then they're... And all the people that employ them have to agree to let them go if the federal government needs them. So the employers have to agree to that up front. So, if you have a job and you have a life and you want to just do the patriotic thing and serve in the National Guard or the reserves from where you live, it's really a pretty good deal. You get a little bit of extra money on the side, and it doesn't hurt too much in terms of the time you have to spend doing it. But if you get activated, it's all out of your control. You go to war.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of it.
So you said you can join as an officer.
Oh yeah. You can sign up for the reserves of the Guard, and then you can start your career that way. They have their own promotion system. It takes longer. Again, it's not based on 4 years you're up from captain to major. Maybe it is. But anyway, once you get to major, lieutenant colonel, you have to have a slot for a lieutenant colonel in your AFSC to go into before you get that promotion. It's more political than the active duty is.
And then in terms of the variety of different types of jobs that are available to you in the reserves versus in active duty, do you get given sort of the leftover jobs, or is it like there are extras of every type of work sort of on the side?
No, there are Guard units that have specialized jobs, and you have to have the skill, the Air Force Specialty Code and the skills to do a job in that unit. So there's a 154th wing at Hickam Air Force Base. They've got F-22s, so they have F-22s and F-22 maintenance and F-22 supply and all that stuff associated with the F-22s. They've got KC-135 tankers there. And then there's a Guard unit up at Wheeler that it's an air defense center. So the Guard will be looking to fill those positions. And when you go say, I want to join the Guard, they'll try to match you up with one of those. And then that's where you go. And that's what you do. And you can switch between National Guards from the different states. I've heard them and seen them doing that. You get a job and you move to Ohio, and you want to stay in the Guard, you can work it over a period of time to become part of the Ohio National Guard.
You have to be adopted by a unit, right?
Yes. I had a friend, a good friend of mine, who things just weren't going as well in the AWACS community as he wanted. He wanted to be an 06 like his dad had been in the Florida Guard. So he bailed and he went into the Guard in Florida, and instead of being an air battle manager, he switched to become a communications officer. So at the Air Operations Center at the 1st Air Force there in Florida, he became their A6, their communications chief. But he never made 06. You know, he just kind of got stuck in that political system in the Florida Guard and couldn't get any farther.
Prior to this conversation, I didn't even realize you could make it to 06.
Oh yeah, you can. The Guard and Reserve have general officers. Actually, now that I think about it, I was technically a reserve officer for 4 years. I didn't get my active duty commission until I made captain. But that's just because during the Reagan buildup, they were bringing people, they didn't have enough slots to bring everybody into active duty. So there's a little bit of competition for those active duty slots. You had to put in a good 4 years before they made you an active duty officer.
I think I've got one last question for you.
Okay.
And then we can wrap this bad boy up. If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently? Loaded final question.
I would do one of two things. With respect to the military, if I wanted to go that route, I'd go back and make up my mind that I wanted to do it like when I'm in high school. Pay a little bit more attention in math and engineering, and go probably the ROTC route. Although I think it'd be pretty cool maybe to go, if I could get into the academy, to play football for the academy.
Yeah, there you go.
I might have been good enough to get on the team. and then go into the service with my eyes open, as opposed to just completely ignorant the way I did it. I don't know if I'd have done any better in the end, but I sure would have been more aware of what was happening to me as I was getting started, at least.
Yeah.
I think if the other one would be that I would have had a much better clue as to how to get started in some sort of career with television and broadcasting. And it goes back to something I think about every once in a while. And talking to you, I thought about it again. I thought I had it buried, but when I was at the University of Wyoming, I was the sports director for the little student radio station and TV setup that they had there. And much to the chagrin of the commercial radio station in town, I also broadcast the football and basketball games that were home games. In fact, I did one at Air Force one time, really, really upset them. And the last year, Wyoming got into the Holiday Bowl, and I went down to watch my brother not play so much, but sit on the bench for the Holiday Bowl in Phoenix. And they came up to me, and a guy from the TV broadcast said, we're looking for a spotter for Wyoming. We understand that you broadcast their games and all that. Would you like to be a spotter? And I said, no. I want to watch the game with my friend and my family. And now I look back on thinking that was the dumbest thing in the world. My whole path might have been different. But now that I kind of have an idea that you got to really get your toe on the door to get started, that would have been a golden opportunity to be a spotter, and then just go talk to guys and say, where can I show up to just start working with you guys? I'll do anything. That's how you get started. So that's the other thing I might have done had I to do it again. I wasn't very smart at that age.
Hey, I'm still not very smart.
Just not very focused on what I might be doing. I just kind of always felt that it would all kind of lay itself out for me at some point. It did, but that's what I would do differently. I would have a focused approach to joining the Air Force with my eyes open, or I'd take a more focused approach to try to get into broadcasting with my eyes open, instead of muddling through the whole process.
The older I get, it seems to me that it's more obvious that you're not really allowed to know what's going on all the time, where you're going to go, what you're going to do. And I think sometimes the best path is the one unseen.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot. It's one of the things I don't like about our whole system, our whole society. Two things. Career paths, all that. If you happen to have a millionaire father and a family business, you can just kind of go in and become the dude. That there's a path there. For most people, they have no idea. And of course, relationships are a crapshoot too. Maybe at some point in the future, we'll be able to go online and click on the right girl and click on the right job and have a path to go work on it. But right now, it's a crapshoot.
If you were able to log into a computer and the next day have everything you ever wanted, that would be awful.
No, I'm not. Yeah, that would be awful.
That wouldn't be the game of life if you knew what was coming next.
No, I get that. What I was talking about with respect to having a game plan to join the Air Force, a game plan to get my first good broadcasting job, all that is retroactive thinking. It's all because of what I've learned over 60 years, but I still wish some angel or somebody would tap on my shoulder and say, this is you're clueless. This is how you need to get started. But again, very few of the people I was with in the military were the kind of people that had been planning to do what they were doing their whole lives. You know, to fly in AWACS planes and do airborne command and control was something that came available to them later, almost all of them. And I think most all of them were really happy to have had the opportunity.
That is a beautiful note to end on, ladies and gentlemen. Papa Schaake, thank you so much for coming on, for being my first episode of the Flights of Life podcast. Thank you, sir.
You bet. Okay, I hope that scratches the itch a little bit.